But I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to chat for a few minutes, and then Helena will chat for a few minutes, and then we'll probably have a big old conversation about sort of what it is we've said, and but also the connection that you have to the Creative Bravery Festival. Just to start, actually, there's two Gormans in this Zoom room, which is a really good thing. And I don't believe we're related, but if we are, then make sure you let me know. So, okay, I'm just going to share because I'm fed up looking at my face on the Zoom. So I've created this little, what I'm going to call a Pecha Kucha done badly. When Karen asked us to do this, what popped into my head is an origin story. And those of you who don't know about origin stories, they sort of come from this idea of comic books that of characters that we don't know about, or we don't know their full background or story. And I really love the origin story, and in particular, obviously, the Joker, because it helps you understand parts of the puzzle that you don't know. And as a result, it allows you to understand the sort of complexities of the situation rather than the sort of binary polar. So Batman is bad. I'm sorry, that was me. Batman is good and Joker is bad. And for me, it's not helpful because it sort of creates those divisions that we're all seeing in the world. So actually what the origin story does is start to raise questions about why is a Joker bad? What is it within his past and history that has created this sort of psychopathic character? And I'm not suggesting any of us are psychopathic characters, but it's important that you understand the origins of where we come from, because for me, everything that we are talking about is about people. And the Joker doesn't come from an organization. The Joker is the Joker, and the Batman is Batman. And maybe if the Joker was part of the Scottish Government, or part of Hidden Giants, or part of Edinburgh College, that person might not be the Joker, because they would become what we see as the organization. And what we have done in the Creative Bravery Festival is bring people together. And although they are representing their organizations, it's very much about the people in that team. And so I sort of want to tell you that story of how we came together, and why it's important that we always remember that people have an origin story, and that origin story will inform how they arrive within your company, and what that collaboration then will be. We spoke a lot when we were working as a team about this idea of coming round the table. And we first came round a table in an office in Murray House at the tail end of last year. And this group of people had been brought together to explore the idea of hosting an event at the Firestarter Festival. And really it was that, and our passion for education, potentially the idea of reimagining education, or believing that there are other ways to educate. And the original team, I think there was 5 or 6 of us, and we come round the table, and although we didn't have a buffet like this, it was very obvious that we were all coming with different dishes. And we're using the metaphor of dishes. I'm sort of talking about the experiences that we have, the backgrounds, the connections, the tribes. And in doing so, we started to form a team that existed out with the teams that we already exist within, which becomes a really interesting and useful conversation point when we come to it later on, is how often we allow ourselves to form new teams that exist out with our existing structures. And it was something that I found really liberating, and we did a reflection just earlier this week, and we all spoke about that idea of feeling very liberated, moving away from the sort of dogmas and status quos that exist within the cultures and systems that we work within, and we formed a new team. And so we created this event for Firestarter Festival 2020, which feels like a long time ago, even though it was just the beginning of this year. And we created an event about reimagining education, and what we could do if we all came together in a different way and had different types of conversations. It was really interesting because this team that we had was non-hierarchical. It felt very agile. There was no sort of one leader. It was a sort of distributed leadership model. It moved and changed. People adopted roles. People created roles. And as a result, we staged this event at Firestarter Festival in January. during that event, and Helena probably will talk about this better, but because I wasn't there, something within my personal life, as usual, was going wrong. But the team delivered this session, and what came out of that session was almost a sort of crystal ball gazing moment into the future. Because what people said was all the stuff that was about to happen. They spoke about learning being a global activity as well as a local entity. They spoke about classrooms without walls. They spoke about interconnectedness, interdisciplinary, people-led, learner-led. But there was always this sense of, oh, this is too much. It's not realistic. These things will never happen. We will always have schools. We'll always have exams. We'll always have teachers. And then about 6-7 weeks later, the whole thing went woof. And we hadn't really thought about what had emerged during that Firestarter event until the moment where I think it was Karen sent us an email and said, maybe there's something that we need to pick up on that allows us to continue this conversation. Now, at that point, COVID was happening all across the world, and it was happening obviously in our lives and the institutions that we were working in, and the whole thing felt very chaotic. And what I have observed over the past few months is that there's many different responses to what happens when things feel uncertain. And it just so happened that the people in the team seem to thrive within the uncertainty brought by COVID. And as a result, we started to say yes and it's really crucial, that sort of idea of saying no but, because it's yes and. And what no but does is say, well, no, but I don't have any time to do this, or no, but I need to think about my students, or no, but my family have got needs, or whatever. As a result, we started to say yes and because we went on this process of saying yes and, we started to find time that we didn't know existed. And that becomes a really useful and interesting, again, provocation when we come to it. That we found time because we found purpose and we found meaning, and that felt quite exciting. And even though all these stressors and strains and pressure and outside forces and internal forces were sort of telling us to stop, we kept moving, which was, again, an interesting conversation. Something also interesting happened. Something also happened sort of just at that moment. And there is something called the Scottish Learning Festival that happens in Scotland every year. And Education Scotland announced that it was going to be cancelled. And we all got really excited. And we got excited because we had certain thoughts and feelings about how the Scottish Learning Festival was currently being delivered, or had been delivered traditionally. And we asked the question, well, what if there is another way to stage a learning festival? And it was simple as that. And as a result of that, that then sort of cemented the purpose and allowed action to emerge from the noticing and mattering that we had sort of gone through. And so we kept on meeting up. And this is sort of what I think the world looks like this all the time. People would completely deny that, and they would say, no, Paul, it's lots of little Lego bricks and they're all glued together. But I think the world sort of looks like this anyway. But I think during lockdown and COVID and pretty much the whole of 2020, this is what the world has looked like. And I love it because it's uncertain. It suggests that there's an uncertain path to build what's coming next, and we don't know, but we know that there's something there to be built. And everyone who was sitting in this team started to spark off each other and said, well, what if we put that red bit next to the grey bit? And what if we move that yellow bit over to the brown bit, and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm using this metaphor as Lego because I see the process, or I understand the process of what we did in the team, is to start putting bits together that either weren't naturally going together or felt they shouldn't go together. And as a result, this thing started to emerge. And this process of change happened. We'll come to this, but one of the events I attended during the festival, this idea about pedagogies of uncertainty. And there's an article which I'll put in the chat box in a minute that talks about this idea of uncertainty being an essential component of learning. which connects to some of the stuff about risk and failure, that you have to be prepared to welcome and cherish uncertainty. You have to be able to tolerate and manage uncertainty. And then you have to move through this process of reducing uncertainty. And what I saw happen was that, even though I didn't know this document existed, but within our team, we loved this idea of not knowing and holding the space of not knowing, because in doing so, we started to create meaning from this process of building and designing. And it just so happened we were designing a festival, which none of us, apart from Karen, none of us had ever done. And definitely none of us had staged a global learning festival, which is also another thing that we decided to do rather than just make it Scottish. It was an example of just saying yes, and we could have quite easily said, no, let's just keep it Scotland. That would be much easier. But we said, no, let's go global. So this space opened up, and as a result, we saw a box of Lego emerge in front of us, and we started to build together. Something that we have become aware of, but also as a process, and then this isn't a negative reflection at all, but when you're working as a group, when people are sparking and when things are happening, it's clear that there's this sort of spectrum of risk or tolerance of risk that we need to be really wary of. And I'm very conscious of it because I work a lot in schools, and there's a lot of stories that I hear at the moment and are emerging from our school system that are really uncomfortable, and pushing into that or against that or with that becomes a sensitive process. And so there's this idea of like standing in shark infested water. I work quite a lot in Australia, and I'm always amazed when I go to Australia because I'm standing on the beach a bit like this woman with a side like this with helicopters flying over, obviously trying to look for sharks. And there's like wee kids in the water, there's grannies in the water, there's families in the water. And I'm like, whoa, this is mental. What's wrong with you people? But there's a cultural sort of acceptance and there's a tolerance to risk. And you go, well, yeah, but the risk is small, even though I'm going, but the risk is surely great. There's a great white shark potentially swimming in that water. And so there's just something that I wanted to bring to the table. Again, it's a provocation maybe for later when we start talking about all this, is the how do you manage that within a sort of collective, within a team, but also in terms of the thing that you are designing, that you're putting out there, is how far do you push it, knowing that we have to push things far, that we have to keep asking these really difficult questions, but also be aware that we don't want to alienate. And so there's something beautiful about this moment of standing, going, well, do I go into this shark infested water or do I not? And how do you take people with you, or how do you, whatever. Okay, I'm almost finished because this is the moment that I hand over to Helena, who said something on Monday, which I think captures everything that Firestarter Festival stands for and also what the Creative Bravery Festival stands for, where she described the moment that we came together. And I'm sorry for stealing this, Helena, but I just love it. Is that it was like somebody screeched up in a car and shouted, "Get in." And see, that is the metaphor that I think we all should take, that we all need, either we are driving the car or somebody else is driving the car, but they screech up and you say, "Get in." And it's a bit like that person who's standing on the beach. It's like you go, right, okay, yes, and once you're in that car, you're moving. And so I want to hand over to Helena because she's going to speak now about the sort of process of working with her colleagues and designers and web builders, and she's going to show lots of lovely pictures. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was brilliant. Thank you, everybody. What Paul didn't say, when I also said, was you got in the car and they put the child lock on, which, you know, is an interesting journey. It's a huge privilege to be here, and it's quite interesting for me. I've just come out of a class. I'm a lecturer, and all of our delivery at the minute is online. And it's a really interesting and challenging moment, and it's like a whole new job. But what I'm aware of in this kind of format is it's very easy to sit back and kind of listen to stories or to disengage. And I think for me, as I tell you this next part of the story, it's lovely to see so many of you here who have been part of the festival. And if you've not, and you're having a touch of FOMO, I would urge all of us, and I include myself, to keep that question in mind, what if? And the what if is a kind of our own personal, I think, call to action at the minute. You know, so rather than sit back and let this sort of wash across you, I suppose for all of us at the minute, well, what could be your brave story? What if, and to think about where you at the minute, even just today in a small way, can connect to this story. So this brings back memories of when we were doing various things, and I would go, oh right, okay. I mean, there are so many funny stories from the festival. I'm still drawing pictures is what I would say about what happened. And in many cases, we were overwhelmed with the response. I think there was 14,500 hits on the webpage over 2 weeks. There were 45,000 page views. But in between that was the humility of, you created an event and there were more of your family at the event than there were of actual other participants. So while it went to 78 countries, in some cases, there were 6 of those people in that conversation were from my family. Or the moment in the Zoom chat, as you'd said to your mother who'd walked this whole story, you should join in. And so she did. But not only did she join in, she joined in halfway through with her microphone on, having a row with my father. So those things are recorded and still wake me up in the middle of the night, as most of my family are on WhatsApp shouting, mute, Mom, mute, we can hear you. So anyway, it was interesting. And I think what was really humbling was to go, you know, even, and I just go back to kind of just at the launch of the festival, and when we brought people together and we brought presenters, and it's lovely to see people here who were part of that. And we actually said as a team, we have no idea how this is going to go. And it was a really freeing moment for all of us. And it was almost like an hysterical laughter, because the winging it was okay. And in fact, being able to wing it at the minute is an essential skill. But it let go of perfection, and it let go of a focus on the product. And actually, the whole process of this festival was more important in a sense than the actual product. So I'm just going to share with you my screen here and very quickly take you on a little bit of a story of where I suppose the idea for the festival came about in terms of the branding and the look of it. So yeah, I got into the car because I'm a Daydream believer. That was the program, that's a program that works with colleges, universities, businesses, to create 50-minute lessons based around creative thinking. And I'm a doer. I like to do things. I like to talk, as many of the team will know, but I also like to do things. And this has been a big kind of focus of mine, in particular looking at communities, moving education out of the silos, into looking at it and saying, how can we come together as a community to openly share our knowledge? So schools, colleges, business, all working together. And in doing so, the word reimagine, because that's what we're all doing at the minute. So just like this is, everything starts with a spark. It starts with an idea. And I think the wonderful thing when you find a tribe of people, and I know many of you out there have a tribe or a part of a tribe, you have. And this format, that what's happened with Zoom and various things, has allowed us to 1 minute be stacking our dishes, and the next thing we're talking to someone in America. And what's happened is it's given us permission to spark and talk about ideas that we would never ever have been able to, I think, vocalize, or had the autonomy and felt we had the permission. So this is the wonderful Gemma. She is one of my first year students. A conversation a couple of months ago started like this. Listen, there's a group of us, Gemma, have got together. We're talking about this. It'll probably never happen. But, you know, what about, you know, could you think of? And I asked her to help us with the branding. And she is perhaps one of the most creatively brave students I have ever worked with. And Gemma's story behind the brand started like this. And she identified it as part of her story. And I know that it'll connect for many of you out there, that nothing ever goes in a straight line. And this was before a pandemic, but even more so now. But foolishly in education, and I count myself in that we tend to think it does. So we say, right, we start in September and then we're going to work towards exams in June. And I've done this for 25 years. So if you trust me, this is the sort of the process that happens. And then we hit into a pandemic. And, you know, within the space of moving in a couple of days, this is the kind of emotions that we experienced. And basically what she did was she took those emotions and created the festival logo based around what creative bravery actually feels like. So just bear with me. She also created this little visual that we used at the start of every presentation. Now, hopefully, if I press this, we did have a few technical issues. So when I see this, my heart does stop a little bit. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So fingers crossed, let's see what happens. Oh, and there you go. Let's try again. So there should be sound. So what she talked about there was really what became our kind of call to action. And the words creative bravery were really interesting because for a long time, as many of you out there, when you've been talking about creative thinking and creative skills, it was very, very hard to take it out of the silo of it being in the art room and the creative drama. But there was something about bravery and putting that together that people got. And they got that was a call to action at the minute. So people began using it, you know, well, I'm being brave and I'm being creative and who knows. The uncomfortable is really interesting, as Paul said, the uncertainty. And also the awareness that we were creating this under a pandemic, under threat. And that's not natural and that's not easy. And many of you will know that that can be opposite kind of opposite parts of the spectrum. But we kept it simple and said, listen, it's a spark, it's an idea, just take it and let's see what happens with it. So Gemma sketched out various ideas of how her brave thinking and the lines and the spark and that could all develop. And she created something like this. So this is a little illustration that shows how the field kind of came together. So she began to draw the bonfire and the different aspects. And as she drew it and created it, we began to become very attached to a web page. And the field became our friend. And what we saw in it was the ability to create a learning ecosystem, to create something that had a place to spark ideas, a place to resource ideas, a place to look to the future, a place to collaborate. And it was a different kind of model to what was a traditional kind of, you know, had become an online festival. And what we loved about it and what was the openness of it. And I think that when I'm talking to you today, what I'm really hoping is that you go to the field if you've not been in it, and you feel as at home and as welcome and as part of it as all of us. And I know I don't like to talk about bacon rolls around this time of the day because people then start to think I'm really hungry and I want one. But one of the visions that Ruth had was we're all in a field with a bacon roll, and it doesn't matter whether you're an 8-year-old kid or a grandparent or the director of education for City of London. It's a level playing field. And that was a very different experience for many of us. The other thing that really interests us was the campfire. The possibility that you could come around a campfire and share a story without feeling that you needed permission from your organization to do that. So I didn't need to come as Helena from Edinburgh College. I could just come as Helena, someone that had a huge desire to change things, coupled with a frustration at the inability to be able to do that. We also wanted to create lasting resources so that it wouldn't be a warm, fluffy experience, that there would be somewhere you could go and it would be your go-to. So when I've been using this all week, I take my students into the tool shed, we've clicked on resources, they've sparked conversations. It's amazing. In there is a 2-minute video about the trolling on social media, which has caused really emotional conversations in my classroom, alongside other things like a Lego storytelling lesson. The discovery or the wonder tent was what we planned, where people could come, businesses could come and share what the difficult questions they're talking about. The lookout tower was visions of the future and films. And then to say to people, there's something that sparked, but if you've been here, you have an onus, you have an opportunity to spark something, to take it and make it your own and shape it. And this little final video kind of, for me, it was one of the last pieces of graphics that Gemma produced for the festival. And when she showed it to me, and it could be the fact that I hadn't been sleeping for the last 2 weeks and was very anxious about this all coming together. When she showed it to me, I just cried. Now it'd be really great if I actually pressed the button and that played. Let me see if this works. So that was it, really. The sparks flew, there was a bonfire, we had some fireworks. It was, without a doubt, one of the most inspiring, energizing, exhausting experiences I've ever had in my whole career. It's been an absolute honor, not just to work with the team, but to see people like Jack and Beatrice and who came, gave up their time, sat, listened, became involved. I have massive hopes for this vision, but I would say it's an ecosystem. And there were 6 of 7 of us in the end. It was nobody's day job as such. And we now need help, and we now need you and your vision to support us. So that's all from me.
It's just wonderful to see something that was sparked, the initial spark there in Firestarter, and how a group of people come together, create something. And now we're going back into the next Firestarter Festival, which will be the beginning of February. And there'll no doubt be Creative Bravery will be involved in that in some way, and it'll be a very similar kind of festival. But the more we have those opportunities for people to come together from different parts of the system, to look at complex issues, to think about how do we think creatively, how do we take those brave steps, I think the more the better, to be honest. So thank you for Paul and Helena for coming and reliving the story. And it's not finished, because we're obviously thinking what next and how do we do that. And if anybody will no doubt have more campfires for people to join and think about how do we take that further. So thank you very much.
Just if you go into the webpage, you can contact us via the webpage, or do go and have a look and give us some feedback, which would be really, really welcome. So yeah, thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the day.